The Echo Chamber, brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. This is Arun Sudhaman, and we're joined by Paul Holmes, founder of the Holmes Report, 18 years ago, I believe. Is that right? Was it 18 years ago?
Sounds about right.
So it'll be the 20th anniversary in 2 years, if my maths is correct.
Spectacular.
We should maybe have a party.
Well, they say PR people don't have a head for numbers.
I'm not a PR person, but anyway, let's move on to more germane topics. What are we to make of Facebook, Paul? You wrote I was going to say very long, but actually it wasn't that long. It was a very good analysis of Facebook's latest reputation crisis, or perhaps a continuation of its existing and indeed existential reputation crisis. This detailing its work with a public affairs firm called Definers, which apparently created and distributed fake news, attacked Facebook's rivals, notably Apple, without disclosing that they were working for Facebook, and perhaps most contentiously of all, went after George Soros, using some tropes that I think are widely accepted as being anti-Semitic. And it seems like Facebook is not willing to accept too much blame for its actions. They have released a memo timed to coincide with Thanksgiving, where Elliot Schrage, the outgoing communications VP, public policy VP, has taken the blame. So let's start there, if you don't mind. What do you make of the Schrage defense?
Well, if I was a cynic, I'd say I hope he managed to negotiate a couple of extra zeros on his severance package for falling on his sword. Because it's certainly the optics, both the timing and the fact that somebody who was already leaving Facebook took the responsibility for this, certainly aren't good. And I think at this point, it is reasonable for anyone to make the most cynical assumption about what Facebook is doing. They've lost the right to any benefit of the doubt, it seems to me. And so, my guess is that having thrown the comms team under the bus with the initial statement that Mark Zuckerberg made to reporters, I think this is just a continuation of that. But whatever Elliot's role might have been in this whole scenario, it's pretty clear that Facebook's problems in public relations and behavior go far beyond one individual in the comms team.
Right. It does look a little convenient. Your story raises a lot of issues that I think are of real importance to the way public relations is practiced in the year 2018, and we'll get to some of them. But coming back to the Elliot Schrage memo, there's a number of things that are interesting in that alone, and one of them is this kind of strange coda to the memo where Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's chief operating officer, also of course under a lot of pressure because the comms team reports to her, she, I think, essentially congratulates Elliot Schrage on his confession and just reiterates that it had very little to do with her. What did you make of that?
It seemed I don't want to contradict myself by saying I don't want to make the worst assumptions. I would hope that it wasn't thank you for taking the hit for me coda, because that would just be a dumb thing to do. But on the other hand, there are so many dumb things about this that this is not the work of a corporation that is thinking strategically about communications. And it sort of came at the same time that Cheryl admitted that that I can't remember exactly how she put it, but that a lot of stuff about definers had crossed her desk.
A small amount. I think she said some materials, not much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the claim is, I didn't read it or didn't remember it, but that just seems highly improbable to me.
And what about the Schrage defense of mission creep? As I think, is a charitable interpretation of how Facebook ended up here.
Yeah, look, I'm not denying that can happen, right? I mean, the line appears to be we hired them initially just to sort of do some background checks, and it sort of it started as a one-on-one relationship, and then it ended up with multiple points of contact within the corporate communications team and multiple points of contact within definers, and they were doing far more for us than any one person realized. But look, I'm assuming that despite its ideological roots, definers doesn't go around doing this stuff for free. Somebody somebody directed them to put these stories on the fake news site that definers runs as a sort of side hobby. Somebody instructed them to try and pitch the George Soros story, the defense of which, and we should get into the specifics of that, the defense of which is, to call it flimsy would be a huge sort of charitable mischaracterization. Somebody in Facebook directed the firm to do this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if they didn't, I think they have to take responsibility for it. Do they not? I mean, they hired the firm.
Yeah, and it appears to be no secret among definers' clients, both what its approach is, and that it spends as much time, again, let's be charitable and call it depositioning competitors as it does sort of promoting the company that hired it. And this is the sort of stuff that when I go to sort of developing markets in Eastern Europe and Latin America, reputable PR firms there tell me that they are that the industry is working hard to get away from. That going on in America is it's pretty extraordinary.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, definitely, I see it here in China. It's an issue. They call it black PR. But I see some people in America arguing that this kind of public relations is completely legitimate, to go after your rivals. And Elliot Schrage does, defends it all under the kind of, I suppose the phrase he uses is opposition research. This isn't opposition research. This is actively going after rivals. Why is that wrong?
Okay, so first of all, there's absolutely no problem, in my opinion, with opposition research. And then, of course, the question is, well, if it's legitimate to do your opposition research, is it legitimate to use opposition research? And again, if you discover something that is genuinely damning about an opponent, then it's certainly within your rights to draw that to people's attention. And I don't have a problem with any of that. What I think happened here, what appears to have happened based on the Times reporting and subsequent reporting, is much more than that. First of all, the Soros stuff. Elliot Schrage says in his statement that they wanted to find out after Soros spoke out against Facebook and its role in the fake news scandals of 2016, Facebook fairly legitimately wanted to find out whether Soros had a financial interest in doing so. There's absolutely nothing that has been published by definers or anybody else to suggest that was the case, to suggest that Soros was anything other than a concerned citizen who found Russian interference in the American elections to be troublesome. You know, one would expect that of somebody associated with the Democratic Party, and I don't see any problem with that. And so it seems to me, and there were, by the way, plenty of other people who seem to have had a much more active role in financing the anti-Facebook movement. Look, I simply don't believe that Facebook selected Soros as the target of this this campaign for any reason except that he was pre-demonized by people on the right, and particularly people on the white supremacist alt-right, and that he would therefore make a juicy target and a big fat distraction. Now, whether that makes Facebook anti-Semitic or whether it makes Facebook simply willing to partner with anti-Semites in order to get its point across or in order to score a point, I don't think it makes much difference, honestly. I think both are equally reprehensible. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, again, if you find something that is legitimately troubling about your opponent, then that's one thing. The fact that they pitched all of these sort of flimsy stories to reporters and got nobody to bite, and then ended up, you know, publishing it on this fake news site in the hope that it would be picked up by, you know, Breitbart and others, Daily Caller and others on the far right, and sort of mushroom into a legitimate story, suggests that there was absolutely nothing there, that this was the only route they could go. And finally, you know, and this is to me the critical point, is just because you can do something, just because you know, something is a legitimate thing to do, doesn't make it a smart thing to do. And this was dumb. This was always going to end up on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post or on CNN or somewhere else. And it was always going to be with the headline, Facebook tries to smear opponents. And why would, you know, first of all, why would you do that? You know, it's not like anybody who's been in public relations for more than 20 minutes thought that they could get away with this and that headline wouldn't one day appear. That would be absurd. So it's just not smart. And then, you know, this, I'm sorry, I'm turning my answer into a rant.
No, it's good.
And then there's the whole question of, you know, what's the benefit to Facebook of going after Google and Apple and others in the same kind of space that it's in? It's not as if, I mean, the objective here surely is to head off regulatory intervention. And the way you do that is by saying our industry is full of good guys, not our industry is full of bad guys. You say our industry is capable of self-policing. I mean, I made this point in the story, but this is why, you know, every time there's an air crash, you don't get American and Delta and United going after Southwest and saying, hey, they're unsafe, shut them down. That just destroys confidence in the sector. And, you know, so you end up punishing yourself. That just seems absurd.
Yeah, you make the point in your analysis that this kind of technique, which is really, I guess, a transplant from the political world, but it's a zero-sum game, and it just doesn't work in business.
Right. No, I think there are lots of legitimate lessons that corporate communicators have learned over the last decade or so, and probably longer than that, from political campaigns. You know, political campaigns start out with a a sort of clear objective. They are highly integrated. They are driven by research and data and all of that fun stuff. And, you know, the more of that makes its way into the corporate arena, the happier I'll be. But the reality is that politics and business are not analogous, and acting as if they are, and, you know, taking the more tribal techniques of politics and trying to transplant them into the corporate world makes no sense. First of all, customers and stakeholders are not as tribal as political parties are. You don't have the same affinity for Amazon that you do for your liberal or conservative ideology. You don't have the same affinity for Facebook that you do for, you know, Manchester United or the Dallas Cowboys or, you know, the Indian cricket team. And so, you know, trying to transport political techniques that work in that tribal, and as you say, zero-sum environment, is fatally flawed.
Mm. How important here, or is this just a minor detail? TechCrunch published some of the pitches they'd received from definers, none of which, many of which attacked companies, I think in particular Apple, in some cases Google, none of which disclosed that they were working on behalf of Facebook. I mean, is that something that firms should always be doing when they are perhaps using opposition research?
First of all, yes. You know, I think trying to hide behind a veil while doing this is first of all, you know, it's not going to work long term, and secondly, it's got to be a red flag to media, which is why, at the end of the day, none of these stories ended up getting picked up by, you know, legitimate media. It's just not smart. And again, you know, I question the logic to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. What does this say about? I mean, I don't want to tar the whole tech industry with the same brush, but the truth is that Definers has found plenty of business on the West Coast. I think there's a follow-up New York Times article, and not just the New York Times, but several outlets have published details of Definers' clients. I think Qualcomm is a key one, Lyft, Lime, Juul. What does it say about the technology industry that they are so willing to work with a firm like Definers?
So it seems to me to be the kind of naivety that thinks it's being really smart and cynical. You know, it's somebody in the tech sector thinks this is terribly clever and sophisticated and sort of what big boys do, when in reality it's the opposite. And look, the history of the technology sector and public relations, and look, I'm painting with an extremely broad brush here, and obviously there are examples, there are exceptions. But the history of technology and public relations is that you do whatever you feel like doing until suddenly somebody calls you on it. And then you realize that this stuff could actually start to impact your business. So and then the first instinct is that, okay, how do we get away with this without actually changing anything about how we behave? And unfortunately, if you're not a sophisticated user of public relations, if your entire sort of public relations, public affairs staff comes from a political background, for example, because you think that's what you do when you have regulatory challenges in particular, you know, then you end up doing things that are fatally flawed. And look, whether it was Microsoft and antitrust 20 years ago, or whether it's Facebook and the crisis of confidence that it is facing and exacerbating today, the playbook is almost exactly the same. And I don't know whether it has its roots in this, the product and the technology is everything, and as long as we're creating great machines or great great networks or great apps, everything is going to be everything else is just an afterthought, and why should we bother ourselves with that? Whether it's the arrogance of success, where we're entrepreneurs and we're driving the economy and people should just leave us alone, or whether it's the fact that an alarming number of people in Silicon Valley read Ayn Rand, as many of us do, when they were 14, but alarmingly still believe it into their 20s. I have no idea, but but there's something in the air in the technology sector that warps the thinking on this stuff.
The fact that the playbook hasn't changed, though, does that suggest that there actually isn't enough of a penalty for this kind of behavior?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you described this crisis as existential for Facebook at the beginning of this conversation,
but it isn't really.
And I wondered about that. I mean, is it? I think that I think that this is one of those situations where, first of all, Zuckerberg and Sandberg appear to be taking this seriously. In that, they're spending a lot of money to fight it, or rather to pretend that they're fighting it. I'm talking about the fake news thing now. But they take that as a threat to their reputation quite seriously. Look, in America, I think because of the First Amendment and because of a sort of broad pro-business environment, it's unlikely that this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back as far as Facebook and other social media companies are concerned. But in European markets, for example, there is much less reluctance to regulate what social media can and can't do. And it's certainly conceivable that you will see legislation in Europe that either seriously restricts the kind of people who can advertise on Facebook, or the kind of ads that get through to people in Europe on Facebook, or that that it becomes regulated in the way that many media are in Europe, which goes quite a long way beyond what you would expect to see in the US. And I mean, at some point, you would think at some point people have to lose confidence in, because it's not just it's not just the fake news. It's not just that. It's privacy concerns. It's a cavalier attitude towards people's data and security.
Of course.
And this stuff does matter.
I mean, and that's what they're really afraid of, right? The regulation, and in particular regulation that regulates them as a media company.
Yeah.
As opposed to a platform. Okay.
Yes,
now,
I mean, that is, that's the most realistic possibility. But it's a little sad that you mentioned Lyft earlier in the context of definers, because to a certain extent, Lyft came along when Uber was very well established and sort of positioned itself as where the good guys in the ride sharing, where the guys who don't have Travis Kalanick as a CEO, and I mean, is it too late for somebody to come along and say, we're Facebook, but we're not going to screw you over, and we are going to police our network the way it should be policed?
Well, that was Mark Warner's
know,
point, I think, at our conference in DC. You know, I think he said one of the potential options here is a new network that does things properly. I mean, to me, it seems unlikely, but he seemed to think this was a possibility, a genuine possibility, and not as difficult as one might think.
I wouldn't discount it. I mean, you know, the only thing I'd say is once it's up and established, Facebook will probably buy it. But you know, but I mean, if you think about it, there are you know, differently oriented networks that have come along since Facebook established itself and carved out a niche for themselves. And you know, I mean, one of the things that Facebook has done here, right, is it has clearly aligned itself with, whether you think it's conservatism or the far right in America. I mean, this whole campaign was designed to get people on the far right defending Facebook, right? That's the only reason you use George Soros. So Facebook has sort of made it clear that that's its core demographic. Those are the people it wants on Facebook. So, you know, if you started a social network for liberals, why wouldn't they? You know, why wouldn't they consider moving? Right? I mean, so. You know, I don't think we should discount the possibility entirely.
Sure. One more thing I wanted to ask you about. NTK, is that what they're called? NTK, the fake. It really sounds like a North Korean, doesn't it? Isn't it
That was my reaction too.
Yeah, isn't that a North Korean media agency? So NTK is this, let's charitably call it a conservative news media organization. Appears to share similar resources and people as definers, but they have denied that these stories were placed, and that they ran them as any editorial organization would do in choosing to run stories, which seems a little dubious. But leaving that aside, the bigger issue here, I would think, is that you have, and you know, this comes back to the whole question of fake news. You have these organizations that are running these stories, and it's difficult to ascertain who they are and why they're running them. Do you feel that perhaps, I mean, how do you, I guess, address that if the algorithm is not going to address it, which seems to be clear by now? I think I think I saw somewhere Facebook's top 10 stories last week were all kind of really heavily driven by some of these kind of right-wing sites. What steps are there really, but beyond actually asking these news organizations or these media organizations to disclose where their funding is coming from?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question for me, because like I grew up at a time and in an era where it was pretty clear what legitimate media was and looked like, and what propaganda looked like. And we have somehow, as a society, lost the ability to make that distinction. Or, you know, we have decided that we don't want to make that distinction, that if a story makes us feel good about our ideology or our views, it's credible. And if it doesn't make us feel good, if it contradicts something we believe, then it's not credible. That just seems to me to be unsustainable. And I'd like to believe that that's still a minority of Americans. And by the way, I think it is, right? I mean, I think, look, there are lots of people. There are lots of people sharing these stories, but it's not everybody. It is contained. It is a sort of fairly select group of people. It's perhaps broader than we would like, but it's not universal. And look, I just think we need to start very early in schools with media literacy training, with critical thinking skills. You know, I've said this before, but you know, this idea that that there are millions of people out there voting illegally, as our president suggests. You know, going to the voting booth, going outside, putting on a Groucho Marx mustache, and walking back in 2 minutes later to vote again. I mean, if you give that even 30 seconds of critical thinking, it becomes absurd, right? Why have we never caught even one of these people? You know, why when the Republican Party claims to know that it's going on, have they never done anything to prevent it? Why aren't they doing it themselves if it's so easy? I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. And yet there are millions of people who believe it's happening. You know, I think critical thinking skills, media literacy, these things have to become far more broadly taught than right now.
You made the point
but that's a very long-term solution. I mean,
yeah, you made the point that you know, you grew up in an era when it was clear what was news and what was propaganda. But I mean, you grew up in the UK. In the UK, the media, as in many countries, is in many cases newspapers are owned privately. I mean, the Daily Mail was owned by Lord Rothermere, who was a Nazi sympathizer, and that influenced that newspaper's stance. It's not always that clear cut, is it? Even with these so-called mainstream publications. I mean, we see that most obviously, I think, with News Corp. Is it as simple as saying, well, you know, we just need to be able to tell which outlets are credible and which are not?
Yeah, again, even growing up in the UK, where I think we were all aware that the Daily Mail was a sort of socially and fiscally conservative publication. The Daily Mirror was sort of centre left. The Guardian was, you know, sort of upper class progressive, whatever. I mean, you knew where these publications were coming from, but at the same time, you know, there was a clear difference between the opinion pages and the news pages. I mean, yes, the news pages would give different emphasis to different stories, but the news pages were factual for the most part, as they still are in most legitimate media. What changed in the UK was, you know, the Daily Mail started running all of these sort of half-true stories about the EU. Your bananas can only be so bendy, or whatever, which was just nonsense, as news stories. And you know, you have publications in the US now that do the same thing, where you know, complete fake stories have become news rather than opinion. You know, look, there are people a lot smarter than me, maybe even smarter than you, who are spending their whole lives thinking about how to combat this, and haven't come up with anything yet. So I suspect it's not a problem that we're going to solve on a podcast.
No, indeed. Okay, well, Paul, thank you so much. I would, of course, recommend everyone reads the Facebook analysis, not least because you have to pay for it. So
yes,
that's something to bear in mind. But if you are a premium content subscriber, then it's all yours, and you can read it. And we'll get you back on the show soon, Paul. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm now joined by Holmes Report Associate Editor EMEA, Maya Puinsk-Sims. Maya, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Irene. How are you? How's Hong Kong looking today?
Hong Kong's great. It's very nice weather. It's like 22 degrees. Yeah, it's Thanksgiving. So as usual, all non-Americans give thanks for the fact that America has shut down. It's just this kind of blissful peace.
Yeah. No, it's lovely and quiet actually. I mean, I
Yeah.
have freezing fog over here, as I said. So it's less nice, but it is noticeably quiet. Although I've got a million Black Friday spam emails in my inbox, which is just hugely irritating. But anyway.
Yeah. So what should we talk about?
Let's start with our fabulous Creative Index. There's some interesting stuff in that this year, I thought.
Yeah, so it's year 7. Wow. Amazing.
Does that make you feel old? 7 years of the Creative.
I feel old anyway. It's interesting, isn't it? When I launched it, it really was just like a bit of a laugh. And it has become, I think, more of a benchmark these days. I think agencies and companies take it quite seriously. I mean, it's a pretty rigorous methodology we have now. And a shout out to Kathy Wallace, who crunches the numbers for us. And this year ended up with some interesting results, as you said. I mean, Weber Shandwick keep top spot on the agency table. So it analyzes entries and winners from more than 25 PR, digital, and marketing awards programs from around the world over a 12-month period, ending with the 2018 Global Sabre Awards. The formula takes into account the expansion of PR work across multiple categories at shows such as the Cannes Lions, and the methodology favors agencies designated for idea creation. And with all that said, Weber Shandwick took top spot again, probably because it just seems to do so well globally. You know, it just has a really solid showing across all regions.
Well, they had that brilliant Iceland campaign, but it wasn't just that. It was, across the world. There's, what's the other ones we've named? ActionAid.
ActionAid, yep. Feve, GSK, the Mattel Uno, or is it Uno? I can't remember. I think you pronounced it.
I think it's
on stage.
Yes.
Yeah. McDonald's, Royal Caribbean. There's a lot. They just win a lot of awards, Weber. They're like an awards machine. It must be disappointing for some of their rivals. I think notably Edelman, because Edelman dropped 1 spot from 3rd to 4th, and I think Edelman's whole thing has really been to try and deliver that award-winning work, and they're doing great work. Let's not suggest otherwise, but just on this particular index, not ranking as high as, of course, Weber. Burson Cohn & Wolfe came in, new entry at number 2. I mean, they benefit from basically 2 agencies to become one.
Well,
in the words of the Spice Girls. Sorry.
It's encouraging, I think, that nice Spice Girls reference. It's encouraging that BCW are in 2nd spot, and I know it's a merger of 2 agencies, but actually it could have been otherwise. You know, they could have had a year where they were nowhere as a result of the merger.
Oh, easily,
so
easily.
I think that bodes really well, actually, for them as a business going forward.
Yeah, what was interesting about BCW is they scored really highly across Asia and EMEA. So very well in India, good in Europe, where both Cohn & Wolfe and Burson did well. Good in the Middle East, where Burson is strong. Ogilvy 3rd. Ogilvy always do pretty well on this. They were helped by Fearless Girl, which came top of the campaign ranking, even though I think Ogilvy only really played a supporting role on Fearless Girl, but that they did get some points for that. A very strong campaign out of South Africa, Life Uncensored for Pfizer, helped Ogilvy as well. And in terms of the overall rankings, I think probably the only other really notable result is Ad Factors coming in 10th, despite not really being a global network. They've had a remarkable year in terms of awards, some great campaigns, winning at the Global Sabres and at Asia shows for clients like Godrej and ICI. So they've done well. I wasn't on the ranking, but in 11th place was Olsen Engage. Yeah, which is kind of amazing, given that they don't. They're more. You're more likely to expect them on the weighted table. So we have, as you know, we have a weighted table where we basically use a points per head calculation. So we weight the agency scores according to staff size.
So I think this is the more interesting table, this one.
Yeah, you and all of the agencies on it.
Because this is, this whole pound for pound, who's the most creative thing is really interesting, especially, I mean, we've got the global table and then we split it out geographically.
Yeah.
So we've got this,
sorry, go on.
This Australian boutique Campaign Lab, I don't know that. They're kind of they've massively at the top, and there's only 8 of them. Yeah,
so that's the thing with the weighted table. I think it is a pretty accurate gauge for kind of pound for pound creativity, taking into account an agency size. When you're 8 people, though, I mean, the odds are really in your favor. So they won. They didn't quite, they didn't have the volume of award wins of, say, an Olsen Engage. But Olsen Engage is like 150 people now, let's say. Campaign Lab is 8. Campaign Lab won, I think they were shortlisted for 8 awards last year, and they won 6 of them. So yeah, I did not know them either. I'm actually meeting them next week. They're coming into Hong Kong. So yeah, they've done remarkably well, and they knocked Tin Man and Unity, who came 1st and 3rd last year. Campaign Lab knocked them off the kind of top of the table. Tin Man again, really impressive, because they came 1st last year and demonstrating, it wasn't a flash in the pan.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're still only 4 years old as well. I mean,
Right.
there's obviously it's literally just an office of creative squirrels there. That's all they're doing. They've just been super creative and turning out great brand work. So they'll be on there for some time, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some good names on there. All the ones we would expect, certainly in EMEA, with Hope and Glory and W, Unity as well,
has
still
now
doing
been
great work.
Yeah, Unity's 3rd spot. They've ranked in the top 3 for 6 of the past 7 years, including a 1st place spot on 4 occasions. Of course, the big question, and I'm sure the agency will take this in the spirit in which it's intended, is to see whether they will continue to rank in that kind of top 3, despite the leadership upheaval over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously all of these awards are actually for 2017 campaigns, basically, just going into the beginning of 2018.
Correct.
So
they're all for work.
Pretty
much. Well. Yeah, they are all for work pretty much produced in 2017. Correct. And then some other interesting results on the weighted table. I think AKA coming in from Singapore, and Atmosphere from South Africa, Nucleus doing really well out of Norway, Echo from Myanmar. So that's the first Burmese agency to ever rank on the Creative Index. As you mentioned, W from the UK and Milton from Finland. So a lot of geographic diversity. As you said, we did the regional rankings, because I think it's probably more fair to rank these agencies against their peer group. Because, I feel like an Olsen Engage should be ranked against US agencies, because even on a pound for pound table, when you're an Olsen Engage, you're a lot bigger than a Campaign Lab. So you kind of have to take that into account. So we've got the regional rankings and the campaign rankings. Like we said, Fearless Girl came top. I think everyone will be quite familiar with the names on this list. Palau Pledge in at 3rd, Blood Normal 4, Too Cool for Plastics, Vic's Touch of Care, Don't Tell Marty, Aflac's Giant Duck campaign. So kind of all well-known campaigns. Once again, I think demonstrating the way that brand purpose has become a key ingredient in award-winning work.
That's still huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Still huge, especially, and the Too Cool for Plastics campaign that Weber did with Iceland. I mean, obviously this came out quite conveniently the week after we've had the big Iceland Christmas ad thing in the UK.
Yeah.
Which was supposedly banned, their ad about rainforest deforestation by palm oil producers.
Yeah.
So they've hit the headlines again with this kind of campaign. And there's obviously lots of questions about whether, as I said in my analysis piece, lots of questions about whether this is just a really cynical PR stunt because they knew damn well it was going to get banned because it was a rebadged Greenpeace cartoon about this orangutan lost its habitat, or whether this is just actually perfectly in tune with their brand values. I think it's probably a bit of both. I think
I think your analysis.
They knew it would be banned, and
and it's a very good. Well, it's both a worthy cause and a really good public relations stunt, I suppose. And I think your analysis was really captured this very well. The kind of different issues at play here. The interesting thing, I think, is Iceland, of course, as you mentioned, coming off the Too Cool for Plastics campaign. So it's kind of taking on that kind of campaigning mantle.
Proper activism, brand activism at play here. And it said, as I said in my piece, and another nice coincidence, we're clearly tuned into the universe and stuff around Iceland at the moment. Richard Walker, the boss, was also on our Innovator 25 for EMEA at the same time, and he's really, I mean, he's the son of the founder, and he's really, Weber Shandwick, when I approached them and said who's behind the Too Cool for Plastics campaign, I want to put them on the Innovator ranking. They're just like, it's Richard, he's just driving everything. And it's really interesting that that's coming from the CEO, who's not, he's not a creative, he's not he's got a background as an accountant pretty much, and he's just absolutely running with this, not just positioning, but what Iceland stands for. And comes back to this, the actual brand purpose. I mean, whether or not you shop there, it's like, well, they're trying, given that they are a supermarket, they are trying to do their best to be, to do good in the world rather than harm, which is, and that's all been driven by the CEO and then supported massively by his PR and marketing teams. But really interesting what's going on there. They're definitely ones to watch. I mean, the trouble with sticking your head above the parapet is also that he's now open to more scrutiny, I guess. So, that doesn't always pay off. As we've seen with the whole, Nissan thing this week in Japan, there's you can have too much of a profile, I guess. What's your take on that whole board sacking Carlos Ghosn this week after he was arrested for alleged financial misconduct?
Just coming back to Iceland really quickly, I just think what's interesting as well about them is, you mentioned it's being driven by the CEO, and I do kind of wonder that whether that's the way it's going to have to be if it's going to be real across an organization. So it's not just maybe a campaign dreamed up by the marketing department, but something that actually is being driven by the overall leader of a company.
Proper top down, this is what we stand for, and we're gonna shout it and be proud about it.
And the other thing I'd say about Iceland is they've come a long way from Kerry Katona.
They have come such a long way from Mum's gone to Iceland. They have. And
the final thing I'd say about Iceland is it seems to have sparked a backlash to the backlash. So you had this this outpouring of support for the ad, and people kind of I think it was all these petitions to the regulator, which is Clearcast. And then you've kind of got this backlash to that, which is all these people saying, well, actually, I'm going to keep on using palm oil, and I love palm oil. Have you seen that?
No. Is this a thing
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. It's. I've seen it on my Facebook. Loads of people saying, "Well, I'm not going to boycott palm oil, and here's why." And
Wow.
yeah, so I think this is the sort of backlash economy in which we live.
The backlash to the backlash to the backlash.
Yeah, these days.
Everything's so polarized now, though, isn't it? It's polarized.
Polaroid or polarized?
Polarized. Polaroid. Polaroid is still a thing. Is that still a thing?
Yeah,
But
no, it is.
polarized. It's like well, everyone takes a view now. There's like no sitting on the fence and going, well, I might do a little bit more research about palm oil. Yes, I'm for. No, I'm against.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway. It's the Twitter economy as well as the backlash economy.
Yeah, and Facebook. So Carlos Ghosn, I wonder if this is a sign of the changing kind of leadership paradigm, to use an awful word. I mean, Carlos Ghosn is very much the kind of I don't want to use the word dictator, but CEO as not quite rock star, but centralized power at the top of a business, came in, saved Nissan, then inked the alliance between Nissan and Renault and Mitsubishi, and in the bargain ended up getting paid 3 salaries and becoming omnipotent with a huge degree of power across 3 big automotive companies. And for the most part, I don't think there was too much of a suggestion that he was using that power in a kind of negative manner, because the general consensus was that he had done very well at these companies. But of course, Maya, with great power comes great responsibility. And in particular, responsibility to ensure that you are beyond suspicion and above the pale. And when you're getting paid these enormous sums of money, you can't afford any slip-ups.
No.
As you said, it's alleged that he's underreported his salary by something like 50%. The news has come out conveniently timed because I think there was a proposal to fully merge Nissan and Renault, and I think many of Nissan's leadership were against that, the Japanese leadership. So the timing is interesting.
Interesting is yes.
Yeah, it is. But he's been arrested, and now he is gone. To, if you'll excuse the pun. Tough. Must be a tough week for his public relations person, Jonathan Adishek, friend of the Holmes Report, who is probably having a pretty busy week, I would imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine he is. But I mean, it sounds like it's all been handled, but in terms of like managing a scandal at the top like that, it sounds like it's all been managed pretty well, given that there's clearly huge cock-ups in corporate governments throughout the process to allow him to get to the point where he had almost too much authority.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to attribute blame here apart from Carlos, because it is his personal salary, right? So I mean, he did have I think there's this person, Greg Kelly, has also been implicated, and he's a Nissan employee, and I think he was involved in some way or another. So I don't know if it's correlation or causation. Is he underreported his salary because he had so much power, or the two things just happened at the same time. I think that we were getting to a point where his power, though, was breeding a certain amount of resentment across not just Nissan, but the other companies as well. And, I can imagine he probably wasn't the most consensual leader, right, when you have that much power concentrated in one person. And I do think that model is perhaps changing towards a more democratized leadership style, in line perhaps with this, with the more kind of dissipated model of power that we have, given the rise of social media. So maybe his time has just passed.
Yes, it feels like he belongs to another era of leadership, really, now.
Yeah, and this perhaps is an opportunity for these companies. I hesitate to say one company because they are still separate companies, although there's all these really weird cross shareholdings, and I don't know what will happen. I mean, that's quite interesting, is what will happen to the cross shareholdings now. Will they unravel? You know, there's talk of Nissan, Renault going separate ways. That will be interesting to follow.
Yeah.
So that's that's the one of the big Asian crises of the week. The other one, as you might be aware, is Dolce e Gabbana.
Oh gosh, yes. You just want to kind of literally tear your hair out over this one.
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable. In fact, it's been kind of dominating my day. I've just been getting messages from people in China kind of all day about it. There's a video. So anyone who's not aware, Dolce & Gabbana came out with this really misjudged campaign to do video of a Chinese woman trying to eat Italian food with chopsticks. And
why did they do this?
it is, I think it has been described as insensitive, racist, and sexist, which is, you know, quite something for
tick.
Yeah, exactly. Ticks
it's
all
like,
the boxes.
who signed this off? I mean, at the very best, it's incredibly patronizing.
Yeah.
But at worst, it's just downright racist. It's like, what it's meant to. Well, they said it's meant to celebrate Chinese culture, but it's kind of. I mean, there was no temperature checking going on here. It's basically PepsiCo all over again, isn't it? It's like, who signed this off? I can't believe anyone who's kind of a senior comms advisor rather than an advertising creative would have looked at this in more than 2 seconds and gone, yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, that's the thing. I think this is the problem with them. I don't want to necessarily suggest it's a problem for the whole fashion industry, but fashion companies in general, I think, often do a lot of this stuff in-house. And they're not the most diverse places, let's be honest. Right?
No.
And I think this is the problem here. If they didn't, you would hope that a team with more diversity on it would have caught this really easily. And the suspicion, I think, is that there probably wasn't that level of diversity amongst the people that that approved this. And you know, it's kind of not just the video, because there's also been Stefano Gabbana, these racist comments that he allegedly made on Instagram, like really crazy stuff that he was coming out with. That's gone viral. He said they're not him. He was hacked. I mean, some people are dubious about that because it's quite a sophisticated tone of voice. Whoever this hacker has done. Dolce & Gabbana themselves have said they were hacked because they also kind of doubled down on the campaign on their Instagram. Loads of Chinese celebrities have kind of come out and said they'll never buy or work with Dolce & Gabbana again. I mean, everyone's dropped them. Every Chinese e-commerce site has dropped them. They had a huge fashion show planned. That was what the video was promoting. That was cancelled by the Chinese authorities. It's not just Chinese e-commerce sites that have dropped them. I think Mr. Porter or Net-a-Porter, one of the two, has dropped them.
Yeah. I mean,
Lane Crawford has dropped them as well. It's just spiraling now. It's really spiraling.
Is there any way back? Do you think there's any way back from the brand after they've cocked up this massively and offended an entire nation?
I'm not sure. I think it will take a really, really long time. They've released a video of a very contrite. It's in Italian and with Chinese subtitles. So I've been told that it's weird, but a start on the road to potential recovery.
Okay.
The comment I had from one China PR person. I mean, I think it will take them quite a while, because I think what you're seeing in a lot of countries, but China in particular, is just increasing sensitivity about this kind of stuff. And you see it in India as well. And it's kind of like, I think because these countries are sort of emerging into the global economy, they are quite sensitive about how they're seen and portrayed. And they're really powerful now. And then you couple that with, as we've talked about, the backlash economy, and then you end up with Dolce and Gabbana's. I mean, yeah, a lot of problems for them at the moment. I'm curious to know if they are using a PR agency.
Yes, well, we should probably find out, and they will probably be on our crisis roundup next year.
Oh, I think both
No doubt.
D&G and Nissan will feature on that for sure. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have a lot of sympathy for Dolce and Gabbana. I think this is just, yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Well, you saying remarkable, I think it's just idiotic, really.
Yeah.
I think it's unforgivable to
Yeah.
do something that's so insensitive.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't, honestly, I can't even imagine the meeting where that happened unless there was a load of 12-year-olds in there. It's like no maturity, no consideration. It's it's baffling, utterly baffling.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and apparently in the video, Shanghai was written in Japanese characters. I forgot that bit. So,
I really.
yeah, it's not just, yeah. They've really gone all out. So maybe it's almost like if you were sitting down and saying, okay, how can we really offend China, and then you'd come up with this ad.
I feel like using the same tone as I would with my children when they've done a really bad job on their homework. And just like, what were you thinking? I'm very disappointed in you.
Yeah, but I am quite confident, Maya, that your kids would never get it this wrong.
No, the 12-year-old and the 10-year-old would have done a better job.
Yeah,
frankly.
Absolutely. I have more confidence in your kids than I do in Dolce and Gabbana at this point.
Thank you very much. So do I.
Yeah.
Just as well.
All right. So, are we going to talk about PR now?
I think we should just wind up really briefly, because obviously this is a circular argument where it's now an actual circle of purgatory, isn't it? This endless thing about whether PR should call itself PR and really embrace being public relations, or whether we should just be going JFDI, let's just do the integrated thing and do whatever clients need us to do to solve their business problems, regardless of whether we would call that PR or not. So we've had MC Saatchi PR, which is now MC Saatchi Public Relations, to great fanfare. We've had Golin repositioning itself and re-embracing PR, although I think they were one of the first to, so they weren't PR a few years ago. So this is, come round again, around that circle. So, both approaches, we're going, yay, we're PR, go PR, I love PR. And also, actually, the label just doesn't seem relevant now because of the type of work we're doing. Both have had, been supported and derided in equal measure. I think that whole we are PR, team PR. Whoop, whoop. It's like I don't know. It's kind of exhausting.
Right. Yeah, I find it tiresome. I mean, I don't think any of these positions are mutually exclusive. Like, and we've, Paul has written about this extensively, and he wrote a really great long read on it, Public Relations Now More Than Ever, last year, where he made the case, as he has done many times, that public relations covers, all relationships with the public, and therefore you can call yourself integrated marketing or strategic comms, and really that's all a part of public relations. I understand agencies have a business development agenda. I think that's the kind of crucial thing here from their perspective, is they're thinking, well, how can we best sell ourselves to clients? And a lot of it will depend on who those clients are. Are they comms directors? Are they PR managers? Are they CMOs? And what do those clients want to buy? Do they want to buy something called a PR agency or something called an integrated marketing agency? But I do think, to a certain extent, as you've alluded to, it's almost a question of semantics in a way, because everyone's just doing the same things, really. The actual substance of what people are doing is not that dissimilar.
I do take John Hughes's point though at Golin, that if you search, I mean, this is very basic, but it's like, what is your into a company, right? If the search, like millions of search results if you put public relations into Google, and there's like a handful if you put integrated communication. So it's like, what are we? What if you want a relationship, if you want a new relationship with a company, it's like PR is as good a way as any of describing yourself, because that is what they're looking for initially. And then once you're in, of course, the Golin headline, I think, was sort of, I think they picked the wrong thing slightly, because actually what they've done is invest really, really heavily in all this brand new data analytics stuff, which they're going to show me in a couple of weeks, which will change what they can achieve for clients in quite hard business terms. But PR is still there to be able to solve those business problems with all these new tools they've got at their disposal, thanks to tech innovation. So
but I mean, again, I'd say I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. I would think that good, strong data and analytics, like many firms are rolling out, not just Golin.
No, loads of them are now. I mean, everyone's doing different things. That's the thing.
Are simply a requirement now for public relations, and I think Golin I think the timing didn't work for them coming after M&C Saatchi. I just feel like there was a level of fatigue in the market that didn't help them.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right.
And I think perhaps the sort of progressive thing, and I can understand why they say that, because they're trying to differentiate themselves from the fact that PR has kind of become synonymous with this sort of commoditized media relations and publicity, and not really what the full breadth and depth of public relations as we would define it. So hence the sort of move to tag it as progressive. But then of course you're kind of saying, well, if we're progressive, then everyone else is backward, and that will annoy people. But I think they're fine with that. I think they're quite happy to stake out a positioning that is a little bit provocative. But I can confidently say that this argument and discussion we will have again in 5 years' time.
Yes, it's not going to go away. I remember writing a piece in my this previous life on the other publication. I remember writing a piece literally 18 years ago, saying PR's not just fluff or spin. I mean, that was literally my headline, and we are now nearly 20 years later, still having the same discussion about
I've written it. I mean,
what the understanding of PR is in the market, all that stuff. Yes.
And I don't understand, because I actually think it's really clear what. Sorry, I just dropped something, but it's really clear what public relations is. I don't see why it's so hard for people to define or to understand. I think the industry gets a pretty hard. Has had a hard time in the mainstream media because it's often lumped in with fairly shady practices, but it's not really that hard to define or understand. And I've written it, wherever I've been covering public relations, this story and this question always seems to come up. So it is tiresome for us.
It's because we're just jaded old hacks who've been doing this for too long.
Exactly. Well, I'm jaded. You're quite, I think, positive.
I'm still slightly more excited about everything PR, but no, it's only because we love the industry and know what it is capable of that this is frustrating for us, I think.
Do we?
Okay. I do.
Right. Okay.
Watch these guys. Heart eyes emoji to everybody.
All right. Well, good. Yeah. Speak for yourself.
So it's literally chalk and cheese, isn't it?
Thank you all for listening.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.